All right, good evening. I'm Dustin Seaton, the Gifted and Talented Specialist at the Northwest Arkansas Education Service Cooperative and President of Arkansans for Gifted and Talented Education, also known as AGATE. AGATE is an organization that encourages the development and implementation of educational programs and initiatives throughout the state of Arkansas, especially when it comes to serving and identifying the gifted and talented youth of our state. So you can check out our website for more information and webinars at giftedarkansas.org. Or you can like and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We are Facebook Living us. So if you are watching us on Facebook, then you've already liked us. Being part of AGATE, you get member access to webinars. We have a conference in February geared towards educators and just stakeholders, anybody interested in gifted education. We do have a free parent night on February the 24th of 2021, which seems like a long time away, but it's like 3 months away from now. But webinars like tonight are geared towards just professional development and sharing tips and resources. And uniquely, this is the fourth webinar this week. So tonight's presentation is entitled Tips for Managing Perfectionistic Tendencies in Your Elementary Student. Our presenter is a friend and colleague of mine, Monica Springfield, the Gifted and Talented Specialist at the O.U.R co-op in Harrison. Monica is also one of the best gifted educators in all of Arkansas. I've seen her present tonight's session various times at various statewide conferences. So you are in for a treat, whether you're an educator or a parent. She's going to discuss a variety of ideas and strategies for parents and educators who see perfectionistic tendencies in their children. So as a dad myself, I know I need all the help I can get with my own children. And that's another reason why we've asked Ms. Springfield to share some of these tips with you, because we all need the help we can, especially during times of COVID. So I encourage you to sit back, listen from wherever you are in the state or virtually, but feel free to use the Q&A feature if you're on the Zoom with us live for asking our presenter questions, or if you'd like to make comments, you can do so in the chat box as well. We will be sharing resources both on Facebook Live and in the Zoom webinar. Don't worry, if you have not done one of our webinars before, we are streaming Facebook Live, and we'll be posting the recording of tonight's presentation on our website, giftedarkansas.org, hopefully immediately after concluding tonight's presentation. So with that said, I'm proud to turn it over to our presenter tonight and fellow AGATE board member, Miss Monica Springfield.
Okay, thank you, Dustin, and no pressure there with that best educator intro, but I do appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for having me, and thank you for joining me tonight. A couple more things about me. I've been in education for 22 years, and 20 of those years have been spent working with gifted and talented students. And I come to you tonight not only from an educator's perspective, but I'm also a parent of 2 identified gifted students that are elementary age. And so some of the things I hope to go over tonight will be things that not only I've put in practice with students I've worked with in the school system, but have also been some things I've done with my own children. Again, if you have any questions or have anything that you want me to go over, just make sure you put it in the chat, and I think Dustin's going to follow up with that. I do want to put a little bit of a disclaimer out there. You know, I'm definitely not a licensed clinician or psychologist. You know, this is all based off of experience. This is based off of professional learning that I've been fortunate to be a part of. It's been based off of texts that I've read and different professional articles that I've sought out in this. I'm really passionate about this, and so I'm just really excited to share this with you tonight. So we will get started. And so one of the first things that I've tried to do with students that I've worked with in the school, and then also my own children, is to kind of define this term of perfectionism. One thing that tends to happen is we say, well, you're perfectionistic, and it kind of sounds like a whole child label. And actually there are some types of perfectionism. And one thing that I found helpful is if we can kind of drill down to that type of perfectionism and really dig into what are the behaviors of that perfectionism. It makes it better to figure out what strategies or what tools to put in place to kind of help kids manage that. And that's another big critical point. Being perfectionistic is not a bad thing. But what happens a lot of times with our kids, what happens with my own kids that I parent, is sometimes there's a meltdown, there's a hang up, we're not able to move forward. And that's when perfectionism is a problem. And that's kind of what tonight is about. So, really realizing what are those areas, knowing what are some strategies that I can put in place when my child is hung up. If my child has a perfectionistic tendency, but it's not causing them stress or anxiety, or it's not hanging them up in getting a project done, then there's no really need to intervene at that point. So tonight is really about a time to think about what is this tendency and how can I help them, because they're kind of caught in this cycle of not able to move forward. So the first one I'm going to talk about is academic achiever. And this is really your kiddo, or if you're a teacher out there, students in your class, they're the ones that want to get a 100 on everything. The world comes to a grinding halt when that 100 hasn't been achieved. 98 isn't good enough. They're the kids that want extra credit. And you may see this in your child at home. They come home and they bring a 98, and it's still not enough for them. So that can be one area. And this is typically one that we see a lot as teachers in the classroom. And sometimes it can be perceived as being super over competitive, or almost being a little bit arrogant. And it really isn't that. It's just that is kind of a hang up they have. They have this high level of expectations they've made for themselves. They set a high standard. And when they don't get there, they really just can't handle the feeling of that. Oops, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So another area that I like to talk about is the annoyed accuracy assessor. And I've kind of renamed this. These titles are from some research that I've looked into. And so this is that kid that has a certain way things should look. And when that can't happen, they're very frustrated. This is your kiddos that will erase and erase and erase and erase because it's not perfect. These are kids, I had a lot of these kids in class, and I even have one of my own children. They don't like, they want a clean copy. They don't want it to be a rough draft. They want it to be perfect the first time, and they'll erase until it is. And they really struggle when it doesn't come down from their mind onto the paper in the way that they imagined it. Then we have risk evaders, and this is kids that are afraid to take a risk, and they're the ones that if they do decide to take a risk, and they don't get out of it what they thought it was going to be, or it wasn't right, it wasn't perfect, they didn't win, they're not going to do it again. They sometimes will stick to tasks they know. We sometimes can't get them to try anything new. Like I said, they don't want to extend their project. They don't want to expand their skill set because that fear of failure is there, and they can't handle that. And then we have this type of perfectionism where this is who people think I am, and this is who I want them to believe that I am. I don't want them to think that I can't do everything perfectly. And so some may be saying, well, how is that different than a risk evader? Well, risk evader is really it's self-motivated. So I'm not going to take a risk, but this image manager is what other people think. So that's the really big difference between that. And then we do have, which is really hard sometimes to define, but we do have this type of perfectionism where they will just not do anything. And you might be saying, well, if they're not doing anything, how is that perfectionism? Well, it's perfectionism in the way that if they don't do it, that grade they could have gotten is still out there. If they do it and they're not successful, then that grade is in stone. So they would rather take a 0 than to take an 80. And that sounds a little strange, but this is really the reason why sometimes we don't see ability and performance matching up in school. These are the kids that sometimes we're confused and we're thinking, what's going on? They have tremendous ability, but they're not passing any of their classes. And so sometimes it could be this. As we look at the first three, those are really internally driven types of perfectionism, whereas controlling image manager is more of an external. And then this never getting it done perfectionist, that's kind of a mix of both of those. There's this internal thing, that this internal battle they're fighting, but then they're worried about what others are gonna, they'll see this 80, I'd rather them see a 0. So I think this is a really good starting point, just because we generalized you're a perfectionist, and then we don't really know how to help it, because in general you're a perfectionist. Well, where do I go from there? And so this really puts it into context for you, so you can start thinking about, well, where does my child fit? What am I seeing? And those are the areas that you would want to focus on. And that's what some of our work is going to be tonight, is a few strategies you can put in place to help. Um, just share a couple of personal stories. One thing I shared with Dustin when we first started, I kind of talked to him about this and what I wanted to do. He said sharing anything that perspective I could bring as a parent would be great. And so, I have that academic overachiever. And so we've really had to talk about effort versus the end result. And we'll talk about that as we dig a little deeper into some of these strategies. And I've really had to work with my child on breathing and trying to get that stress down, and realizing that a mistake is okay. And no one can do everything absolutely perfect all the time. And then I also have a risk evader in my life. And this child is very afraid of making a mistake. And if a mistake does happen, there's no recovery. And so something I'll share here that I've shared with him is just talking about things like, even like the cleaner 409. And I don't know if you know how that cleaner got its name, but it got its name because it took them 409 tries to get the formula right. And so again, I'm going to dig into that a little bit deeper, but I wanted to give you like some parent perspective here. So I don't really ever worry about the other three very much. They may have tendencies, but those are the two big areas that I see in my own children. And so whenever they get hung up, which is what I see, that's when I kind of put something in place for them. And so you might be thinking as a parent, well, where do I start? How do I know which one? So some of you may have looked at that and you might have just right away said, that's my kid. When I started my work in this, and then when I started having children, I kind of started to notice some of those things. And before I did, but I'll be honest and transparent, before I started really digging deep into all this perfectionism stuff, I really just thought someone was labeled perfectionism as a whole. And so it was really nice to be able to see that there are different areas so that you can focus your attention. And so one thing that I gave to Dustin, and he'll drop it in the chat. I'm not sure if he'll do that now or later in the presentation, but it's kind of a resource page. And so I'm not saying that you have to sit down and give your child this survey, but there's some yes, no questions, and there's also some rating questions. And so you could ask some of those different questions and get your child's input, and it would kind of give you an idea of maybe where some of these areas where things are troublesome for them. And as we go through tonight, another thing I would like to do is share some resources. As a parent, reading's been a big part of our parenting style. We like to read to our kids. Our kids both enjoy reading. And so I wanted to share some things like that. So this is a book called Nobody's Perfect, and it's a little chapter book. And I like this book because it's a pretty easy read, but this is something you could sit down with your child. And as you go through the chapters, you're going to see this main character. She displays some of these different types of perfectionism throughout the story. So if you're feeling as a parent, like, I don't really want to sit down and ask my kid, are you perfectionistic? Do you feel like you have issue? If you're trying to kind of figure out a way to start the conversation, you could just look over some of the surveys and ask some questions. Or you could read this book and you could kind of use that as a way to say, well, have you ever felt like this? Or what do you think about how this character was right here? She got really upset when she didn't, make the best grade. Like, do you ever feel that way? Because sometimes just getting the conversation started can be the first piece. And
We
then,
do. I'm sorry, Monica. We do have our first question.
okay, go ahead.
What happens if the child is showing tendencies in different categories that you just presented on?
Okay. Well, I certainly think that could happen. I would say that the main thing to think about is it hanging them up? So in other words, I'll just use the academic overachiever. Let's say the kid is home, they're doing their homework, they can't get a problem right. There's crying, there's a meltdown, I'm stupid, I can't do this. Then that would be a time where you would need to maybe intervene and use a strategy that I'm going to share later. If they're at home and they're just a little frustrated about the homework, but they seem to be able to move through it, and maybe they have a couple of questions, I'm not sure that you'd really have to do anything at that moment. So I think it's going to be one of those times where you're just going to have to kind of think about, is this hanging my child up right now? Or are they kind of able to manage through it? I hope that answered that question. I don't know how great I'm going to be at these on the spot questions, but if it didn't, please say something because I want to make sure I cover it. Do you think that answered it, Dustin? Should I keep going?
Yeah, I'll still monitor the chat and the Q&A.
Okay. So yeah, that would be my advice. You may see those tendencies. Like I said, I may have seen some of those other tendencies in my kids at times, but I really have to be careful on that academic achiever and that risk evader one for me personally. So, and I'll share a little bit more about that as we get into some of the strategies. I'll give you personal examples of how I've used them with my own kids. So again, this page is more about where's a place that I can start. And I do want to tell you that what I did on that resource page that Dustin will share with you, there is the book title and author. I got all of these on Amazon. They may be somewhere else, but I'm just an Amazon person. So I put what the cost was, and I checked all these a few days ago, and that was the cost up to a few days ago. But another idea that actually Dustin came up with, which was great, is he said there's so much stuff out there on the internet, we might be able to find some of these books being read aloud. So that way a parent could listen to the book or share the book with their child through a read aloud. And so most of them had a link to a YouTube, and it might have been a teacher or someone reading the story. And so I put those links in there too. Now, I will tell you this one I could not find. I don't know if it's just an older book or if the way it's set up, because it is more of a short chapter book, but I couldn't find a link to this one, unfortunately. So, the next thing that I found as a parent sometimes that I have to remember is that I still want to instill in my kids like the pursuit of excellence is always the goal. I always want them to give their best effort. I always want them to put forth, excellence in what they're doing. But I have to get them to realize that that is great. But what can be harmful is when it's perfectionistic and it is causing, stress, anxiety, and causing them to get in that cycle of not moving forward. So this is just a good kind of talking points with your kid or some things to think about for yourself as a parent. What is the difference? So being hard on yourself because you aren't equally talented in all sports, that's perfectionism. And that can be an issue because I don't know about all of you out there, but I like lots of sports, but there's some of them I'm just not very good at. So that thinking I can be great and equally talented in all sports, that's a really hard goal to achieve. And so when a child puts that on themselves, they're really going down a path of perfectionism. The pursuit of excellence would be, hey, I'm good at this stuff, but I'm also going to do this just because it's fun. Or I know like some kids will say, well, I'm not very good at basketball. I'm really great at baseball, but basketball keeps me in shape. So that's why I play. A lot of my friends play. And so that's trying to better yourself in one sport and using another that maybe you're not as great at. And so I just wanted to share these little points with you. There's more of this stuff out here, but these were some that just resonated with me. Thinking less of yourself because you earned a B, and maybe it was a project that was really hard and you did something new and you tried something that you hadn't tried before. So that would be more of the pursuit of excellence. So just trying to make sure kids understand, our own kids and the kids we teach, that we want them to strive for the best, but we don't want them to have negative self-talk, and we don't want them to feel like they aren't achieving something if everything is not the best, and I didn't win everything and everything's not, I didn't do it 100, I couldn't achieve it at 100%. And things like criticizing yourself because you lost the student council, that kind of goes with that negative self-talk. Maybe we're saying I'm dumb, or nobody likes me, but maybe just being excited that you were nominated, because I know in some of my things, not everybody gets a nomination. And so if you can get kids to kind of change their mindset on that, and hey, I'll go out for it next year. This just wasn't my time. It's not my time yet. Um, but I'll do it again next year if I want to. And if I don't, that's okay. So this has just been really good conversation. I've kind of used this to help me gauge as a parent, like, is my child just really pursuing excellence right now, or are they really just being perfectionistic? Because again, like I mentioned, there may be times when you want to intervene and you need to intervene, and there may be some times where it's not necessary. And that's the tough part. So this may seem like something a teacher may want to do with students, but this is something that I've done with my kids, and I'll share with you in just a second kind of why I started this. But just talking about these and saying, what do they have in common? I know my gifted kids love puzzles and logic and thinking things through, and they're young enough, they don't really know about penicillin yet, so they don't know, why it was, how it was accidentally discovered. And of course, I wouldn't show this quote down here by Mark Twain, but I just like it, so I put it on here. But it's funny to see what kids come up with. But the bottom line is, all of these were discovered or created. It was a mistake. And so that's really the thing that we have to get kids to think about, is this process, and getting them to think about, like, some of the best things come from times where we don't feel like there's much success. And I know I had a parent that had emailed before this and had kind of asked about some mindset stuff. And this is one way you can get into that that growth mindset, is to get them to realize that sometimes the end result is not the focus, but the journey and the process to get there. And so this is just a really fun way to kind of start that with kids. There's all kinds of stuff out there about things that were made by mistake, and I'm going to share a book with you on that. But then just kind of talking over these things, and these are more for you. I don't know that I would display these to kids, but just letting kids know, I mean, this is talk we just have to have constantly with our kids. Like, everybody makes mistakes. I make mistakes. Your dad makes mistakes. Grandma makes mistakes, and just letting them know that's part of life. No one can do everything absolutely perfect. And so this is really where parents can really hone in on paying attention to effort over result, and acknowledge effort. That really does help bring kids into that growth mindset. And attaching praise to something specific, when they do something well, don't just say, well, you're so smart and you won, but maybe saying, wow, it took you 12 tries to get to that. I'm so, thankful you didn't give up. I'm so happy on how you just kept going. And then reminding them that we're learning when we're making mistakes. And you'll remember what you did, and you'll know what you shouldn't do for next time. And you can't ever know that if you don't mess up. If you just did everything perfectly, then you would never know what it felt like to to how could I do this better? How could I, you know, do something and, you know, in a better way? Again, that third point, you're trying something new or different. I've even used this with my own kids when they've been nervous about trying something. I told you I have a risk evader, and I told him, I said, "You're not going to remember this, but when you were a baby, you know, learning to walk, I said you got up and you didn't do it perfectly. You fell down. I think you bumped your head, but you kept trying. And I said, you didn't know better then that, you know, you were going to get better and you were going to do better just by trying. Because honestly, if we went around with the mentality that I'm not going to do something unless I do it perfect, the first time, none of us would have learned to walk. Most of us wouldn't have learned to ride a bicycle. And so, again, it's just conversation and finding those moments where you can really talk about that. And then seeing your own improvements, I've touched on that a little bit, but one thing I like to mention here is I'll say to my kids, if I took a picture of the first time or filmed the first time you did it, and then I filmed the third time you did it, you're going to see improvement. You're going to be better the third time than you were the first time. But you're not, you wouldn't know that if you just did it perfectly the first time. And so, just again, a great way to kind of talk to them about mistakes and why they're okay and why they're opportunities. And then this is really big with gifted kids. A lot of gifted kids on this last point, they feel like if they have to ask for help, that that's failure. And we have to tell them that learning from others is a great way to improve. And so my advice to parents on this is anytime you can use personal examples. I mean, I talk all the time about work and how we're collaborative and how if I didn't have this person who thought this way and this person that thought this way, then I would never see any other way that something could be done. And we're better as a team than I am just with my one idea. And so these are all just great points that you can use to really hone in on kind of changing the way they look at things. And that kind of goes to that growth mindset. And again, when couple of personal examples, my daughter is in gymnastics and she's trying to learn how to do a back tuck, which is a back flip. And she came out of gymnastics one time really bummed and she said, I can't do it. And I said, you can't do it yet. And she just looked at me. And so just remind, I said, what did you do well? And she said, well, I was great on the round off back, the round off part. But when I got to the back tuck, I didn't, punch up enough is what her gym coach calls it. And I said, so see, you did something well, but what we got to go back and look at is where can we improve on that part that you didn't do perfectly, that wasn't, your best attempt. And so just using those words and just helping them realize that it's okay. And I mean, it has to be organic though. You can't go around the house and set up mistakes and hope kids are going to see you doing them and kind of talk them through. I mean, just really think back to personal experiences where you've had a mistake and think about how you can talk to your kids about that. Maybe you turn the wrong direction while you're driving and then you know talk to them about, oh well, look, I never knew this house was there. If I would have turned the wrong way, we would have never known that this beautiful house is built right here. Just trying to see the positive in the mistake instead of just falling apart. And parents modeling that is really can be really crucial. And so again, I talked about reading. So if you do like to read to your kids, or if your kids just like to read themselves, here's some books about mistakes. The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes, she puts a lot of pressure on herself. Everybody knows her as the girl that never makes a mistake, and then a mistake happens and she kind of laughs about it and thinks about it wasn't that bad. And if your kids are really into nonfiction, this Mistakes That Worked has great stories of those items that I showed you. It's got the chocolate chip cookies and the silly putty. And so if they really like that kind of stuff and they're real short stories, then you could let them dig into that book. There's 40 different inventions in there. Help your dragon learn from mistakes. I would say that's more for lower elementary. He's got a pet dragon, and that dragon is messing up everywhere and is super hard on himself. But then he takes a different approach. The kid takes a different approach to looking at the mistake, and it helps the dragon realize that it wasn't so bad. And Beautiful Oops is, I love that story. It's art based, and there's a drip of paint and there's a torn piece of paper, because we have some kids that just can't get past anything being less than perfect. They tear their paper. I mean, it's a nightmare for them emotionally. And so Beautiful Oops shows how you can take things like that and turn them into a beautiful piece of art, and how you can it can spark your creativity.
We do have
So Justin,
another
I'll
question.
say I'll stop right there.
I like these books because it's fun to get on and check them out on Amazon or on YouTube. Because, like you said, some of these are free and being shared already. One of the attendees has asked, she has a risk evader who melts down multiple times during high stake testing situations or high stakes situations like math testing or math competitions. The student wouldn't put in an attempt that he knew would be incorrect. So ideas for in the moment addressing the experience so that he can regroup. They had, I guess, in the experience of taking the map test, they had to redo it twice. But do you have any suggestions or tips for what they can do in the moment for like a third grade student?
That's a great question. There's a couple of strategies I'm going to get to here in a minute. Mindful breathing might be one of those. I actually use that with my risk evader in the moment. I don't know, this is more of a story, but it might give a little perspective in that. My risk evader is really we've struggled with. I'll just share the story, Dustin, and we'll see if that answers or sparks any more. And then as I move into the breathing strategy, I'll talk about that as well. Um, but I love how she's already identified that he's a risk evader. So that's great, because now she knows that area that she can focus on. So my son plays travel baseball, and he's my risk evader, and he's had a lot of problems with knowing what to do. And so I guess part of my question back to her is, does he know what to do? Like, he knows how to solve that problem, but when it's on the test, he sort of melts down. Is that kind of what's happening, or would this be something he's never seen and doesn't know how to do?
Yeah, she said he knows it's beyond him.
Okay. So, what I had to do with my son is we had to have this conversation, and I don't have this anywhere in the slides. So I'm glad we're recording this, because she may want to go back and watch it. But if she wants to follow up with me, I'll talk to her a little more about it via email. So he spends hours and hours practicing. At practice, he hits the ball well, he fields the ball. Now, I'm not saying he never makes a mistake, but he knows what to do. But when it comes time to play the game, which would be the high stakes testing, he is not successful and gets very aggravated. He's very hard on himself. He is almost giving up. And so I really had to talk to him about having two sides to his thinking. I said he has a teller side and a doer side. And what I told him is, whenever he's out on the field, he knows what to do. He knows how to be in position to field the ball. He knows how to hold his hands and do everything in the batter's box. He knows how to, his body knows how to do those things. His mind knows how to do those things. But he has this teller side of him. And when I say teller, I mean like telling him, make sure you're doing this and you can't get it wrong. And what if you strike out? And so one thing that I had to try with him, and I don't know if this will work, but this has worked pretty well for us, is we had to find a way to quiet the teller, because the teller was getting in the way of the doer. And so the way that we did that is we talked about how he has these two sides and how he knows what to do. And he's seen these math problems before, and his teacher has taught him. And I'm using the math example in place of the baseball. And And so I told him he just needs to do. Well, that's just really hard. He wasn't able to quiet that. He's 11. He couldn't quiet it. And so we came up with a word, and he says this word, and this word was the word he came up with was smooth. It can't be a word like, remember to add, or it can't be something that you already know how to do. It has to be just some keyword that gives the teller a job. So when he started doing that, his body just took over and his mind just took over, and he started doing what he was supposed to do because he was able to quiet that voice that was second guessing, that was trying to make him feel like he couldn't get it done. And that was one thing we did. We've done some breathing, which I'm going to go into later, but that was one thing that really helped. And so I'd be interested if that would help her son. Like if she could convince him that if just a word he says to himself during this testing, so that he's calming that side of his mind that's saying, you can't mess up. This is a high stakes test. You've got to know everything. It's got to be perfect. So that he's just doing what he's already been taught to do. Any feedback or thoughts on that?
Nope. Thank you. That was good.
Okay. And some breathing, and we're going to talk about that. So my plan tonight, I could probably keep you here all night giving you stuff. So I tried to find like my best go-tos that I've used with elementary students. And like I said, I'm a parent of 2 elementary students. And so this has been things that have worked for me, either in my work with students or in my work with my own kids. And I'll tell you which I've used. And so this is a cognitive self-regulation strategy, and it's called the worry box. And this is going to be for your kid that worries a lot. This is the kid who feels like they can't move on because they're so worried about everything. They're worrying about their grade. They're worried about what people are thinking. And so, our inclination is to say, don't worry. Well, yeah, I can tell you that all day, but do you stop worrying just because I say it? No, you don't. And so this has been something that can kind of change, your thinking here. We don't want to say don't worry, but we just want, this is not the time to worry. We can worry about these things, but right now we have a task at hand. We have something that we need to focus on, and so we're going to excuse those worries for just a little bit. So we're going to, if you see at the top, it says we're going to try not to think about X, those negative annoying thoughts. And so you can do a couple of things here. If you want to do an actual box, you can. I've done that with kids and they've loved it, especially when we start this strategy. So get a box, let them decorate it. They can make a box. One thing I'll challenge you here as a parent and an educator, it doesn't matter what it looks like. Sometimes we get kind of crazy as parents with the Valentine's Day boxes and all this, and we want it to be perfect. Let it be whatever it looks like. If it's the worst box they've ever made, just don't worry about that. That's not the strategy. And so what you do is when they start having those negative feelings and those negative thoughts, and they're worried about something, they just write it down and they put it in that box. So we're excusing them because they're in the box, but we're not saying we don't care about them. And then what we do is we find a time where it actually makes sense for us to look at some of these things you were worried about, and now let's talk about them. And that's worked really, really well with kids that are hung up with all these worries that are just like domino effect here. And so then later you get the box out. So let's say, it's after school or whatever, after you do your homework, go back through them and you're going to find that some of them they're not even worried about anymore. And it just was validating to be able to put that down on paper. It almost goes with that idea of being able, if you can just write it and get it out, then sometimes it just makes you feel better and you don't need to act anymore on it. But then maybe if there is something that is still bothering them, now you have time to dedicate to that. You can talk about it. Well, what can we do? And why are you so worried about this? And how can we move forward? And then also just praising the fact that they were able to move it aside to focus on the task that was at hand. So the big picture behind this strategy is that eventually this becomes something that happens in your thinking. So you eventually go from, for elementary kids, having an actual box, just, they find that to be fun, and they like that. And then as we get older, or as we practice this more, then it becomes something we just do cognitively or in our mind. So we're worried about something, we sort of store it away in that box. We can think about the box we made. Okay, now that box is up here in my head. I'm going to put those worries away, and then I'm going to, address them during a time when I have time to do that. It can't be in the middle of my test, or it can't be in the middle of my baseball game, or it can't be in the middle of my gymnastics practice. And so this is a really helpful strategy that I've used with kids that I've taught. I don't particularly use this one with my own kids, but I've seen this work really well with those worrying kids. Another thing that I want to share with you, and I'm going to escape out of this for a second, just so I can show you this page. So I created a digital journal for any parent or educator that might want to use this with your kids. And so they can put their name, and I'm going to go through these 3 strategies with you tonight. And here's this one. And since this isn't a box, this is a page, we called this What's Bugging Me. And so I would say, as a parent, you could certainly use this. If you have a Gmail, or most of our kids have Gmails with school and everything being virtual, you could even talk to their teacher and say, hey, we're really having some struggles with like over worrying. And so this is kind of what we're doing. We have this page. And so if Monica is feeling worried at school, maybe she can just go right to this page and type in what's bugging her, big math test. And if you're a parent and you've shared this with your child, and y'all both have a copy, then you could see it at any time. So if you were at work and you wanted to check and say, well, they're worried about their math test. Sometimes what I've seen happen with kids on this, like it might be the first beginning of school and they're worried about their math test, but then they take it, or the teacher says, we're going to have open book or something. And then this might not even be a worry by the time they get home. But it just helps to validate that being worried and being nervous, those are all normal. Because one thing I found with my son when he was up to the plate in baseball, we were saying, don't be nervous. And why are you nervous? And being nervous is silly. You know what you're doing. And we realized we were doing a disservice because we were making him think that something was wrong with him, because he was nervous every time. And he finally told us, is something wrong with me? I'm nervous. Is no one else nervous? So just trying to get him to think about how to, calm those nerves and use them. And it kind of goes the same thing with this strategy. So you could do a page, you could do an actual box. You could have something at home, maybe on the fridge, where the family could post their worries. And then maybe you have a time where we're going to try to help each other solve, something that bothered you today. But it's just to get you in the moment, to get out of that cycle of negativity and thinking that you can't move forward on your task. Do we have anything, Dustin, or should I keep going?
Yeah, keep going. Well, we do have one question on Facebook. It was about your previous slide, though. This is great information about perfectionism versus the pursuit of excellence. Do you know if teachers and counselors are working on teaching the students the language to use? She says her child sometimes gets frustrated because something is not, quote, perfect, but the behavior is typically from knowing how to express those feelings.
I will say, now that I've moved to a cooperative position and I get to work with a lot of districts, I am starting to see more of that growth mindset verbiage in classrooms. I see a lot of teachers with posters up that have like one side of a fixed mindset, like I can't do it, and then the other side says like I can't do it yet. And so I am starting to see that. I don't know if that's happening. I mean, Dustin, you could help answer this too. You're a specialist with several districts. I do know that we have a lot of focus right now on social emotional learning, and some of that comes with that growth mindset. So I'd like to say yes, I think it's becoming more prevalent in classrooms. But even if not, that's something you could work on your child with. There's a ton of stuff out there about the fixed mindset and the growth mindset, and what you would say for like how to offset that fixed mindset saying. I mean, that could be something you could type up or write up or whatever and have in your kid's notebook or have with them that they could look at. But no, teacher education on that is certainly important. And I think we're seeing a lot more of it. Dustin, you want to pipe in?
I just know counselors have a lot on their plates right now,
Yeah.
obviously because of everyone's experiencing some form of PTSD of COVID related issues. But just during the normal school year, counselors are often also schedulers. They're like co-assistant principals and stuff. So we are working on training more teachers on the language and the verbiage for growth mindset with regular classroom, not just in the gifted classroom, because we do realize gifted children are gifted 24/7, not just the minimum 150 minutes a week. And so we really are stressing the social emotional components as much as we can, but it needs to be a collaboration with school and home, parents, teachers, and counselors.
Yeah, and I would just encourage you to really work with your child on, I can't do this yet. And if you kind of instill that in them and then they can, self-regulate, obviously it would help if there's other resources, supplemental resources like the teacher and whatever, using that language as well. But just if you can start your child thinking that way, I think that's a plus. Okay, so the next strategy we're going to talk about is mindful breathing. And I know that there's can be people out there and like all this mindful stuff and breathing, but there is so much research about how great this is and how it reduces stress. And I'll be honest with you, before I got on this webinar tonight, I actually had to do this mindful breathing because I still get nervous. I've presented this, I've been in front of audiences, but I can't see anyone's faces, but I still get nervous. I want to do my best. And so I have to remind myself that to get my stress level down too. And so the thing about this is, and I found myself doing this as a parent. I'm just being totally transparent tonight. I've told my kids, I'm like, just breathe, just breathe. Well, that's not helping. They are breathing and they're like, I don't know what you're saying. And so this has really worked with my daughter. She's that more of that academic achiever. She's the one that's afraid to make a mistake. And she can be really hard on herself. And so one thing that we had to start doing with her, especially like in some of her activities, was get her to breathe. And so this is a great strategy. And certainly this is something they can do wherever they are. It doesn't have to be a big production. But when I first start this, I always get a note card and divide it in half. And then I have them draw a flower on the left-hand side and a candle in the right half. And then what I want them to do is I really want them to focus on the breathing. And so we start at the bottom of the note card and we go, I'm going to actually go to the digital notebook because that will give me, I'm sorry, guys, give me a second. That will give me a way to show this to you guys. Okay, so I put this on there because again, like if you're just practicing with this with your child and they're like, oh, you sent me to school and I don't know how to do the breathing thing. So this is a page they could refer to, but you start over here and what you want them to do is you want them to inhale or sniff the flower. So this is really helpful. Now boys may be like, flower. And I tell them, well, put a Venus flytrap, put some kind of, doesn't have to be a real flower. It can be a man-eating flower. Just get some kind of flower on there so we can get that image in your head. I want to get that visual image. And so they go up the card and inhale and sniff this flower for a count of 4. And they hold it across the top of the card for a count of 4. And now we're blowing out the candle. So we really want them to exhale for a count of 4. And now we're just resting and letting our mind and our lungs be clear as we go across the bottom for a count of 4. And if we still haven't brought our stress level down, if we still haven't brought those cortisol levels down that help us when we have stress, our cortisol levels are high, we can't think straight. That's the reason why you get in an argument and you say things you don't mean. It's also the reason when you get away and you've calmed down, you're like, well, why didn't I say that? So this is a great way to get kids to really practice breathing and get those stress levels down so they can think about, okay, I do know how to do this math problem. I do know how to hit the baseball. I do know how to, do a back tuck in gymnastics. I can do this. Um, and so you just do this as many times as needed. And so what I did with my daughters, we started with the card. I wanted her to see it visually. And then we went to more of just in her mind. But I will tell you, I see her sometimes when she's in a competition or when she's having a moment of stress. I'll see her do this. And I know she's sniffing the flower. And then I'll see her go, and I know she's blowing out the candle. Nobody else knows what she's doing. And so this is certainly something that you could do at school, your child could do anytime. And you want to move from seeing this and really being intentional about the breathing to just being able to kind of do it on their own, but knowing when it's necessary. And I kind of flipped ahead here, I'm sorry. So that's been really helpful, especially with my risk, with both of my kids, but with my risk evader as well, because just getting him to believe that he can do it and getting himself back to where he can think logically. Because when we are stressed out, when we have anxiety, the thinking part of our brain doesn't work as well. And so if we can really get ourselves back to where we can think, it really does make a huge difference. And so this is something physical. It's, the other one is something we're doing more in our mind. We're getting rid of those negative thoughts. We're replacing, we know we're going to look at them later. And this is really something that you're physically doing to help bring yourself back to recentering your attention and finding some focus so you can get back to where you need to be. And again, you will have access to that digital journal. So even if you don't remember everything I'm saying right here, the directions for this activity, and it may seem a little silly at first. And there's also been times where I thought, this is a little bit silly, but it really does work. And I'll be honest with you, as an adult, I really did do this before the webinar started. And it did help me feel more confident that you know what you're talking about. You've done this before. You can do this. Just believe in yourself. And before I could get those thoughts in, I had to get myself back down to a moment of thinking logically. Dustin, do we have any questions? Should I keep going?
No, just we're adding comments in the chat about you can also do these breathing exercises with apps like
Oh,
Calm
yeah.
or mindfulness coach for kids that would much rather do it with some digital tool.
Absolutely. Yeah. My advice on that would be just to find a way to get them to really practice it. And then you can take those things away, the card away or the app away. If they're trying to just get them, cause my daughter, she didn't want to have like attention drawn to her. That's kind of makes her nervous. And so this is something I know she's doing it, but no one else knows what she's doing. But yeah, I would definitely, there's lots of apps out there too. I should have put some of those on here. I actually know some of them, but I'm glad you guys are sharing. And then the last strategy I'm going to share tonight, again, there's a lot of different cognitive strategies, physical strategies, but this is an emotional strategy. And it's really about increasing positive feelings. And so when you're feeling upset or you're feeling negative, if you can get yourself involved in something you enjoy, then that is another way to kind of release those negative feelings, at least for a moment. And so down here where it says 10%, that's really what I want to focus on today. So doing something you like and doing something you enjoy is always good, but I want to be a little more intentional when it comes to this perfectionism. So I want to talk to you all about the 10% rule. And so what the way that this works best is, let's say that your child is at home and they're working on homework, and they're melting down, they don't understand it, they've started the negative self-talk. And so what you want to tell them is, you want to think about how long have they been working. So let's say they've been working 30 minutes. So you want to take 10% of 30 minutes, which would be 3 minutes, and you want to make them go do one of these things that they like to do. Um, Maybe they go outside for a second and kick the soccer ball around, and you're just trying to get rid of those negative feelings and get some positivity, so when they come back they can tackle it again. And so that 10% rule it's just long enough to get away from what's causing the stress. And it lets you get a little bit of positivity back in, but it's not so long that you get disengaged and you're not willing to come back to the activity. So what I've done with kids is we've made a list of all the things that they like to do. I let them pick. You can see different things on here. And we've had some things that were like small enjoyment, like maybe going outside and kicking the soccer ball, and maybe things that take longer, like gaming, or maybe if I want to go for a long run. And so depending on how much time is in our 10%, obviously, if my son gets on a game for 3 minutes, by the time it loads up, he's going to have to come back. So we really haven't achieved what we wanted. So you really got to think about, we've got to have some little brain break activities, but then we can have some long-term things. And even if your child comes home from school, they've spent 6 hours of school, and they come home and they're bummed, I didn't do well on my test. My best friend and I got in a argument. I can't believe I made a 98. They're kind of caught up in that perfectionism stuff. Then let them go do something for 10% of the time that they've spent kind of feeling that way, whether it was all day, or if they just started feeling that way the last half of the day. Well, how long have you been feeling like that? Well, since the last 30 minutes of class. Well, let them go get some positivity before they get back into something that could be a stressor, something that could cause some stress for them. There's a lot of research behind doing things that you enjoy to relieve stress. And so breathing is one of those things. But this is also, and I love that 10% rule, because I know myself as a parent, I've excused my kids from doing something, and then I have lost track of time, or they've got re-engaged in something that wasn't their homework, and now I have a fight on my hands trying to get them back. And so that 10% rule is just a really good, if you want some structure. So explain it to your child, and let them know, hey, this is how we're going to do this. We have these activities, and I'm going to let you pick. Don't you have to let them pick, but you may have to set some parameters, because if they have 3 minutes versus 30 minutes, some of these things, it might not achieve what you're hoping. But a lot of times they'll come back and they're able to move on. I didn't know if we had any questions, Dustin. I was just trying to
Oh,
pause
that's a good.
in.
It was a good pause. I was checking everything. No, we are at the 8 o'clock hour, and
Yeah, and I'm towards the end. The only thing I have left to share are a few resources.
okay, we're good.
Okay. So again, I'm a book person. I would say English language arts was probably my best subject in school. So these are some more books about perfectionism and how characters have moved on. And sometimes it's fun just to see it in someone else's eyes, and then kind of use that as a way to talk. I really like After the Fall. It's how Humpty Dumpty got back up again. Perfectly Messed Up Story is a really great book about everything's kind of going wrong with his story, and then he's realizing maybe it's not so bad after all. So these are all in that on that page. Another thing I'm going to need to add to that page is this, though. This was something I came across. I kind of forgot about it, and then I was like, I need to put this in. But some of our kids that have that hang up of everything has to be perfect. I'm only the best if I win. If I'm second, I'm a loser. These are actually some board games that are cooperative games. And so there is no winner. Every player in the game has to work together to get to the end goal. And so these would be some great games to have at home or even in your classroom because they're cooperative games. And there's a bunch more out there, but these were just two examples. Actually, I think I did put them in the resource page. I think I did remember to. So just wanted to share that. And then this is also called the Ungame. This is a non-competitive, and when it says everybody wins, that's not like everybody gets a trophy. It just is a way to help kids with knowing that the journey is sometimes the best way to learn. This is has a lot of open-ended questions. It teaches kids about good listening skills, building their self-esteem, and discourages criticism and negative attitudes. So if you're even just trying to promote positivity or um, positive feelings, this might be a fun game to play. And I think that's it. My contact information. I have enjoyed my time with you. I hope that you walked away with something you can use, whether you're a parent, a teacher. I'm happy to continue the conversation. If you want to email me, this is my work email, and I would love to talk specifics with you or share anything that I've come across in my research or in my experience as parents. And I want to thank AGATE. I love being part of this organization for doing this and allowing me to share what I know. And I think that's all I have, Dustin.
We've had a lot of thank yous in the comment. The director of GT program in Springdale has made Tim Smithy made a recommendation that Kohl's occasionally has After the Fall, the book with a little Humpty Dumpty plush for $5.
That's actually where I saw it.
Okay, and I think it usually is around the holidays when they put those out. So that's a great book to talk about mistakes and mindfulness. But yeah, take a picture of this screen if you haven't already, so that way you can make sure you can contact our presenter tonight. On behalf of all of Agate, thank you, Monica, for sharing your presentation. We are going to do a follow-up to this for secondary kids, and it's similar information, but geared more towards the 7th through 12th graders, and that will be on December 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. But I'd encourage y'all to check out our website, giftedarkansas.org, and we'll have the events tab for upcoming webinars. Most of them are free if they're geared towards parents, but we also would encourage you to join our membership, and we'll send out frequent reminders about upcoming webinars. And again, one last plug for our conference on February the 24th, 2021, we are going to have a free parent sessions with some of our keynote speakers in the evening starting after 6. We'll have that information also on our website, giftedarkansas.org. So with that being said, I'm going to say thank you all for one last time, and we'll stop broadcasting on Facebook, and we will see y'all later. Thank y'all very much.